Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual art salon with Louise Deroualle. Before we get started, I'm just going to read a few rules for how to ask a question and all of that, and then I'll turn it over to Lou. So Lou will talk about for maybe 20, 25 minutes. At the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A tab. So if you want to ask a question, please click on that and ask your question, and that way I can kind of sort through and we don't have any duplicates. If you would like to ask a question by speaking, there's an option to raise your hand. And Esther, I actually don't know exactly where that is. Can you chime in?
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so for the attendees, there is a hand at the bottom of the screen in their Zoom panel window, and they just click that, and then you and I, Leah, can see whose hands are raised in the participants section. And then you can sort of call on, in the order that they come in, and then you can unraise their hand when they're done.
Okay, perfect. So at the end of the talk, there'll be a question and answer session. So if you would like to ask your question verbally, feel free to raise your hand to do that. So we are doing these virtual art salons every week. And the next one is Zakaria Rabani, who's the studio coordinator for sculpture at the ranch. It's at the same time, Tuesday at 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And you can find the link for that on our website. So please take a look at that. All right, so without further ado, I will introduce Louise. Louise Deroualle received her MFA in ceramics from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 2017, and her BFA in visual arts from Fundacao Armando Alvarez Peteado in Sao Paulo in 2001. Sorry for that, Lou. Louise has exhibited her work in the USA and Brazil. In 2017, she was awarded the Roswell Artist in Residence Fellowship. She is currently the studio coordinator for ceramics at Anderson Ranch, where she keeps her studio practice. So I'll turn it over to you, Lou.
Thank you, Leah. Hi, everybody. Let's share my screen with you. Is it shared? Can you all see? Perfect. So I'm Louise Deroualle. I'm the studio coordinator for the ceramics department at Anderson Ranch. And I'd like to start my presentation by saying that I'm from Brazil. So English is not my first language, and you're probably going to hear a few mistakes here and there. So I already apologize for that. I first came to the ranch in 2010. So in 2010, I took a workshop in Chile, in Curauia, and I met Doug Casebeer there. And Doug used to be the director of the ceramics department here at the ranch. And Doug invited me to come and work as an intern. So I came on that summer, and then I came back, and I kept coming back. Like I was an intern for 3 years and 3 summers and 1 full year. And being at the ranch was amazing for me. I was exposed to so many different things. Like I learned so much about clay and materials and firings, process, ideas. It was like I was having my undergrad degree just being an intern, by exchanging my work and being here. And it also led me to apply to grad school. So in 2014, I started my master's degree at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And it was great, but grad school was really intense. It was, as it should be, and as everyone else who does it, feel it. So every choice that I did in school was questioned. Every priest was questioned. I was questioned. It was just very hard. And expressing myself in a different language was not easy, especially trying to talk about my emotions and feelings that were provoked by the cultural differences. And I was also living, having like a language barrier. It was a daily experience for me. And the sense of displacement was a constant feeling. I started then to translate those feelings into my objects through expressive surfaces created by the layering of ceramic materials. So the surfaces of my pieces, they were like my own skin. They were thin and fragile barriers between the internal and external world. And like skin, those surfaces, they had blisters, they had cracks, they had wrinkles, they had all this recording of time and story. I also started working with thin slabs, thin and fragile. They were very fragile. They were cut from the same block of clay. And it was a way to talk about the idea of identity construction, how we are formed because of the layers of information, like the successive layers of experience that we have in life. I started using natural materials to represent myself in the work. In this case, the lava rock, this black you can see there. And the lava rock is very porous and light, but yet it's very hard and strong. And I felt it was just like me, like I'm simultaneously solid and permeable. And the lava rock, when subjected to heat, to the firings, according to the temperature you fire, it can retain the shape, it can start to melt, or it can become a glaze, like this black fluid thing you see on the back. And it was also representing how we react, like how I myself, I was reacted to the environment. We all, so the lava rock when melted, whatever glaze is underneath, it reacts very differently. And I saw that as myself too, according to the environment where we are, we behave different. This work is called Self-Portrait as a Train. And this piece is a reflection about my time in grad school. So Lincoln had many trains coming through town all the time, like every other minute. And the trains, most of them, they were carrying coals, but they have all sorts of goods, they carried people. And Lincoln was not the beginning or the end of the route, it was just a stop along the way. And that's how I saw myself in school. I was there in a transitory moment, learning, sharing, getting and giving information. And, it was temporary. My train was going to take off pretty soon. And this is the first time I actually used lava rock. So you can see like I don't know if you can see very well, but the train, the representation of the train is the lava rock. Right after I finished grad school, I was awarded the Roswell Artisan Residency Fellowship. And I moved to Roswell, New Mexico for a year. It was amazing. We lived in this small community in the rural side of Roswell, and they call the residency the gift of time, and that's what it was. They give you the time and support to focus on your own work, and for me it was just perfect. Like I could decompress from grad school and try to digest the whole experience and get those voices a little quiet. I did a lot of work. That's all I did when I was there. I just worked in the studio. But I'm going to show you 3 bodies of work that I did when I was in Roswell. And the first one is called Joyful Migration. So this body of work is inspired by the Sandhill Cranes migration. And as you already know, I lived in Nebraska for 3 years. And that was the first time when I lived in Nebraska that I heard about the cranes. It was not a thing. I don't think they go to Brazil. They're not part of that part of the world. But in early spring, 500,000 birds come through Nebraska to do a pit stop. They usually stay there for between 2 and 3 weeks to rest and feed, and they stay at the Platte River. So when I was in school, I went to see them every spring. And it was just a very super powerful experience to see these birds, the massive number of them. They're funny, they're loud, they're playful, they dance, they jump. And, you know, they migrate. Every year they come and go. And there I was in Roswell in my studio by myself when I heard this sound that was so familiar. And I run outside and I look up at the sky, and there they are. The birds came to see me, like they came to visit me. It was just, I was super happy to see them. Not 500,000 came, just a few, probably like a few hundreds or maybe a couple of thousands. And they come and they stay in a park. It's a wildlife refuge close to the residency. So I would go check them out like all the time. It was October, I think. So I think this work comes to play because for 4 years in my life, I was in a migration pattern. So I told you that I met Doug when I took a workshop in Colombia in Chile. And for 4 years, I was chasing summers. So I was going, assisting workshops in Colombia in South America summer. Then I would go back to Sao Paulo, participate in craft shows and teach and make money. And then come to the ranch for the North America summer. And then back to Sao Paulo to make money and back to Colombia to assist. So for 4 years, I created my own migratory pattern. And of course, it's very different than the cranes, but I was still like chasing knowledge, chasing things that are meaningful and would feed me, that would keep me alive. So in this body of work, I incorporate another mineral to represent myself in the birds and the flying patterns, the mica. So mica is very abundant mineral on Earth. And in New Mexico too, there's tons of mica everywhere. And I don't know if you're familiar with the mica, but it's a layer structure. So it's many layers of mica that come together. So when I was making this work, I was kind of peeling off the mica. And again, it took me to when I was peeling off the slabs of clay from the same clay body, and the idea of identity construction and who we are because of the layers of information that we received. And those close-ups is to talk about how I intend my work to be viewed. So if we go back, like I do intend my work to have a very subtle quality to it. And it does demand time from the viewer. So I want it to be revealed in a very quiet and introspective moment of interaction between work and viewer. And through careful observation, the work unfolds itself and allows the viewer to access the many layers of materials and meanings and information, and hopefully rewards the viewer for their engagement. This is another body of work I did in Roswell, and it's actually an installation. It's my one and only. I only did this one. It's called Delightful Discoveries, the Celebration of a Journey. It is a reflection on my path as an artist and how organic and fluid it has been. So I built 49, it consists of 49 golden rocks. I call them rocks, but they're just hand-built hollow forms painted in gold, placed outside of the residency on our backyard. So each rock represents a different moment, a different place, a different person that I have encountered through my journey and that had become a milestone on my path. So the rocks are arranged in the landscape with each rock set at a distance from each other. You cannot see the entirety of the installation from a single point. So the goal is you see a reflection, like a little gold shining, and it catches your attention. You approach, to check it out. And once you're there, you're able to see another rock curious enough, you approach that other rock. And from that rock, you can see the other rocks and, you know, the other opportunities that will take you further along the way. So the viewer is led through the installation by the viewer's curiosity and a sense of discovering. Like you go and you discover one rock after another, and on that path, you also discover the natural landscape. And this installation is also inspired by how I experience the environment around me. So this is Bottomless Lakes. It's a state park in Roswell. And the park, the formation, has a lot of selenite on the ground. And when the sun shines, the selenite just sparkles all over. And that was something that got my attention. And I would discover and walk through the park and walk through the pools, the caves filled with water, discovering that landscape and exploring it. So this is you can see on the left, like the little, it's hard to photograph, but they were all like sparkly and shiny. And yeah. The installation is still at the compound where we lived in Roswell. When I left the residency, I asked if they wanted me to take it away. And the director at the time was like, no, they're very quiet. They're very interesting. And, you know, just leave them there. So actually today it was funny. A friend of mine from Roswell sent me a picture of this baby that was just sitting and, you know, interacting with the rock. It was super sweet. I also hired someone to do a drone video of the installation so we can have a bird view. And I'm not going to show you here, but if you're interested, you can go to the website. There's a link to go check it out. So back to translating my emotions, you know, talking about emotions through expressive surfaces. I want to talk about a little bit like the format. So I was working with very flat slabs that did not have clean cut edges. I wanted the focus to be, you know, the surface. And they're squarish, so they're kind of like this amorphous shape, but they're not like a rectangle that can either be associated with a portrait or a landscape. It was just about focusing on the surface. And I also want to talk about the choice of blue and white. It's not just because I like blue and white. There's a conceptual reason behind it. So blue and white is represents, it's about ceramic history. It's about the world's history. So for me, it represents the cultural exchange and interchange of cultures. So how cultures are formed and transformed, influenced, adapted, and become fluid. So a little more in depth, in the Middle Age and Renaissance, when the commerce began between East and West, China was already making porcelain vessels with cobalt motifs decorated on top. And those vessels would travel through the Silk Road into Europe. And every European country got completely fascinated. Like porcelain was super high commodity back then. Europe didn't have porcelain back then. They only had like earthenware, low temperature. So they started to search for porcelain, but it was only like a few hundred years later that they were able to discover porcelain. And meanwhile, they start using this white glaze, a tin glaze, on top of the red clay that they use for the pots, and painted with the cobalt. And each country in Europe has a different, you know, interpretation and relationship with this whole story. But what I think it's amazing is like from China passing through Middle East and Europe, Brazil was colonized by Portugal. Portugal has an amazing tile work with this blue and white tradition. And that came to Brazil as well. Like we have many old churches that have beautiful tile work with blue and white. So the way I achieve this surface is by inverting the traditional order of glaze over slip. So what I do, the first layer that I put on is this blue fluid glaze. And on top of it, I apply a slip. So what that does, when you subject it through the firing, it goes through the firing, there's a stress between the fluidity of the underneath layer and the dry layer on top, causing all this cracks and the blisters and all the skin things that I talked about earlier. But it results in a partial glimpse of this interior. And I use the blue fluid glaze as a metaphor for my inner world of emotions. So I call this series of works that are going to see the seed pods, and they also started in Roswell. So I was making the flat surfaces to talk about, the flat slabs to talk about the surfaces as my emotions. And then I proposed myself a challenge when I was in Roswell, like, if these are emotions, they're people's emotions. How can I create an object that I can add to the dialogue about emotions? And how to create a three-dimensional object that I can have add to this discussion. And the seed pod came to be. So they are not inspired by real seed pods. They're just an abstract idea of seed pods that are my shapes. And a seed pod it's a shell. So it's a body that carries inside the potential for life, the seeds, and helps it move, through time and space. So that's how plants, like some of the seed pods, they just fly around and, get landed somewhere else and take life to another time or another spot. They are vessels, and they secure life until they're ready to come out and germinate. And in a way, I think I thought about the seed pod, as a three-dimensional object because I was in Roswell. So I was having this protection from the residency. I had time and space, and the residency was nurturing me and enabling me to develop my work, like to develop myself as an artist. So I think that's how it all came together. And at some point, the pods started to look very anthropomorphic to me. Like I started seeing beams on them, and it was just natural that they would open up. I think they, we are bilateral. Like we have a symmetry. Like we mirror each other. We have two sides, and not only physically, we have conscious and unconscious. Like the human being has so many different dualities present, that I thought it was just natural that somehow this work would become representations of the body. So this series of work now has been made here at the ranch. So when I came back, it's been 1.5 years now that I'm the coordinator of the ceramics department. And I'm still investigating this body of work. And some of the pods, they became bigger. The surface is more aggressive. They also have like this elongated neck. And I was really thinking about connections, attachments, distance, relationships, a sense of belonging, of inclusion, of attachment, of acceptance, of connections and bonds. Metaphor and silence it became like a little series inside of this big umbrella of the seed pods. And they deal with the same questions of relationships and connections, belonging. they are two, when I make them, is two shapes that are completed in itself, and then I attach them, like I place them and see how I want to have this relationship between the two. And they start having attitudes, like they're, I don't know. And there's always one that has the surface that talks about emotions, and the other one that is the clay. It's just bare clay. And I usually work with red clay. I really like its warmth, and I also like how it takes me to the earth. It takes me to dirt, to soil. It's again like this potential of growth, of life. This is the last body of work I'm going to share with you. And In Solitude, There is Consolation was part of my MFA thesis show. So I did it in Lincoln. And it was a homage to Lincoln. So I grew up going to the beach. I didn't grow up at the beach. I grew up in Sao Paulo, which is not at the beach. But we would go to the beach very often. And I would spend vacations, like a whole month, a month and a half at the beach. And I really love it. I love water. I love sitting at the beach and just looking at the horizon, looking at the infinite, you know, and having the water come and go and this breathing and rhythm. And when I moved to Nebraska, I was the farthest away I could be from any ocean. Like I was in the middle of the country. And, you know, it took me a while to adapt, but at some point, you know, Nebraska is flat. So there is the horizon line. It's a big horizon line. And it's a big, big sky, and the skies are beautiful. They, sunsets are gorgeous. They have storms, they have tornadoes. We don't have tornadoes. Thanks God, I've never seen a tornado, but we would see the clouds formations that come before such a thing. And actually we would sit on the porch and just watch. So watching storms and watching the sky became this meditative moment, this encounter with nature that would calm me down and give me this sense of like, come back, reunite, you know, focus, center. And I bring this work up because a few months ago, I was invited to be part of a show called Resilience at the Red Brick and here in Aspen. And it's a show the intention of the show they're putting together is to raise awareness for awareness and advocate for mental health care here in the Valley. And these views that you're seeing, they're all taken from my back window. So I live on the ranch at the corner of the dorms. There's a little apartment and my door gives to the golf course. And this is the view that I have daily. And when I was invited to the show, I just immediately thought back, like I went back to the work that I did in Nebraska. In Solitude, There's Consolation. And thinking about how, well, this doesn't give me much consolation, to be honest, but it's part of my view. And it's part of like experiencing all the seasons that were happening and all the changes. But anyway, like this view from my window, it's a connection with nature that happens daily, like several times a day. Like there are days that I have 10 pictures of the same view because it just changes constantly. And even though this is not, like my work is not the photography, I wanted to share with you this inspiration. So the work for the Resilience show is not done, but you know, this is what is inspiring me, and those are the images that I have in mind. So I want to do another series of like keep the In Solitude There is Consolation with this new view. And I think I'm ending my presentation by sharing inspiration with you, because I think especially now with, you know, this whole quarantine and staying at home order, we need to look forward. We need to have something to be connected to and expecting. And I think it's just like cheers to the future. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lou. That was so wonderful. I'm sure everyone is clapping in their homes. We've got a few questions already. And just to start out, I want to remind everyone that if you want to ask a question live, you can raise your hand. Our president and CEO, Peter Wonders, always says that a question starts with, "My question is." So we really appreciate people thanking us. If you'd like to share your thoughts on the event, please send us an email so we can have that. So the first question is from an anonymous attendee, and they ask, how do you fire this work? Is it gas reduction or electric? What temperature is it?
I fire to cone, well, it varies. I fire from cone 3 to cone 8, depending on what, especially when I have like lava rocks involved. But usually it's between cone 5 and 7. So, and I fire electric, but when the work is big, it doesn't fit an electric kiln. So I do fire gas, but gas oxidation.
Thanks. All right, Esther asks, could you talk about how nature and landscape influences your work? Is it just the experience in nature or something more?
I think, I think it's the experience of being in nature. It's this, nature is so big, we're so small. I think whenever we are in nature, there's a different sense of who we are, and I think it brings like humanity, like how are we part of this world? But I'm influenced just by being there and being in touch, and I do feed from knowing that I'm just a tiny little part of this world. It's much bigger than us. It's so powerful. There's so much energy in everything in nature, from the macro, like this big screen, to the tiny little seed pods. So it's so rich.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've just knowing you more personally, I've like seen your amazing rock collection and just know like how it integrates into all parts of your life. And it's really amazing to see it in the work too. Just to, I guess, follow up on that, I have a question for you. Like you are so influenced by rocks, and I see that in like the textures that you're making in your series and the natural world. And by working in ceramics, it seems in a way you're kind of adding to geology, maybe an urban geology of our world. And I guess I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about your relationship to ceramics as a permanent material and how you see what you are making fitting into the world around you.
So I really love like what you said, like our urban rock or urban permanent thing. Ceramics is permanent. It's actually how we get to know a lot of the history of the world. So to be honest, I do try not to think about that, because if you think too much about it, we create a lot of damage by, working with ceramics, like all the mining of materials and digging of clay and firing gas and electricity. So if you think too much about like, and I'm making something that is going to be on this earth forever, even if it breaks, it's just going to go to the dumpster, but it's still like here present. Mm-hmm. So if you think too much, if I think too much about that, I kind of stop making. So I can't really access that thinking while I'm making. But yeah, it's a huge question, especially now,
Yeah.
And was there another part of your question? I'm not sure.
No, I think that answers it. I think it's something that a lot of people think about as artists, especially 3D artists. All right. Trish Shepard asks, as a lover of landscapes and a world traveler, where would you like to go next? What geographical location or landscape do you dream of visiting and having your work influenced by?
Trish, you know me. Oh my God, she's a good friend. So I do have a few things. I would love to go to anywhere, because everywhere in the world has something to be seen. My latest discovery was Utah in September, and I loved it, and I want to go back, and that's an easy one. But if I could go like dream, I would love to go to Ethiopia in Africa. And I forgot the name of I don't know if it's a park. I imagine it's a park, but it's a place in Ethiopia that is below sea level, and it's full of sulfurs. So it's just like this yellow, looks rich and very dangerous, and boiling things that are just like unnatural in a way, because it's just really not made for, I don't think there's any life in that place. Not even bacteria can resist what's going on. But the images I've seen, they're fabulous. I would love to go there.
Awesome. All right, Marcus Braley has a question, and I'm going to allow Marcus to talk live to ask his question. Marcus, you'll just have to unmute yourself. Here, there we go. Sorry, I'm not able to unmute. Maybe Esther can try. But in the meantime, I will ask another one. So Claire Green asks, why did your pods grow narrow necks?
So I think I started thinking about, they were like, how do you say, like forms, like little things, globes maybe, that would grow from each other. And then when I moved back here, it's like, again, you're adapting to a new place and you're making new connections. And there's all this anxiety that comes to play. And I was thinking about like, those things are not connected, they're far apart, really talking about the connections. So it's just a formal way of expressing or, making these thoughts that I had.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right, we're still trying to figure out the unmute thing, but I'm going to try to let Randy Johnston talk.
Yay.
And try to unmute him. Oop, there we go. Hey, Randy.
Hi, Lou and Leah. Thank you for doing this. This is great.
Thank you for being here, Randy.
You use the term metaphor quite a bit in your talk, and
Randy, you've cut out a little bit.
And I was wondering about, can you talk about a little more about form and surface and how you connect to a personal narrative?
How do I connect what?
To your personal narrative through those metaphors and abstraction?
Oh, that's a big question. Okay, we can be here for a long time. It's hard. It's not an easy question to answer, when I'm like trying to bring to life, like to an object, emotions and feelings, is because it's really hard for me to talk about them. I think they are metaphors, right? Like I think there's a lot of metaphors as titles, because these forms with the surfaces, that's what they are. They're metaphors for what I'm feeling. I don't know if I can answer your question pretty well. I wish I could. It's just it's hard. It's a hard question. I'll think about it. I'll call you later.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Randy.
Thank
you. Okay. One from Doug K. Spear. Doug asks, what are your thoughts about premeditated choices versus unknown outcomes? What role is chance and risk in your work?
Oh, it has a big role. Doug knows me. I do allow a lot of chance and process. I'm very process oriented in my work. So I do start with an idea of what I want to make, but I'm not set to that idea until the very end. So I always allow it to change. So for example, like the seed pods, when I make them, they're just clay, and I just make a tiny little hole so the air can escape, but I don't make the holes where it's going to go on the wall. So I bisque fire them, and when they're out of the bisque, I look back at them, and I have sometimes it takes weeks to glaze something or to see, and then I look at them and see how they're going to go on the wall. Like most of my work is on the wall now. And then I come with a drill and I make the holes and I glaze them. And sometimes when they come out of the kiln, I still have to glaze more because that's not what I wanted to achieve. So I think process and chance is a huge part of my practice. I welcome it, and not only my practice, but my life. It's the same like when I talked about the installation. you know, those rocks represents moments and peoples, and Doug is a rock, Rin is another rock, and so is Jan. So, and, you know, it's being open for what you don't know. Like, you know, Doug always asks me, you have a 5-year plan? Like, what's your goal? And I never do. And maybe now it's time to get one. But I'm very open to, you know, where the path is taking me. It's very fluid and organic.
Great. All right. My mother, Lindsay Agater, asks, do your original South American landscape and culture find expression in your art? Do you have multiple senses of home?
I do. I do have multiple senses of home. It's hard, you know, it's been 7 years that I live here, and I moved so much, like Colorado, Nebraska, Colorado, New Mexico, back to Colorado. So it's just like constant moving. And, you know, to answer the sense of home, for someone that travels so much, I have a lot of baggage. Like, as Leah mentioned, I have this huge rock collection. I have tons of books. I have pottery from all my friends. It's a heavy move whenever I do, but this is my home. So whenever I go somewhere and I get there, the first thing is to take everything out of the box and set up this home. But it is tough. Like, every time I go back to Brazil to visit, it's an adjustment. Like, I am Brazilian, but I'm not living there. So it's just like, it's not that I feel like a foreigner everywhere, but there is a little sense of like, how do you fit, you know? Mm-hmm. And about like the South American landscape influencing my work, I think it does, but it used to do more. Like, earlier work from grad school was very influenced by those experiences that I mentioned, like being on the ocean and watching the water and swimming, like this whole memory. Now it's a lot about like responding to this environment that I'm in, like having like this conversation with what's going on. You can see that in Roswell. Like, I lived in Roswell, and I didn't do work about Nebraska when I was in Roswell. I did work about Roswell, what was happening to me at that moment. And now, like I showed you this, you know, these pictures and the inspirations, I'm responding to what's going on now in my life and in the place that I'm living.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we just have a few more. This one's more technical. Vincent Calabrese asks, can you explain more of the process where you layer the slip and glaze? Are they the same temperature body? Are they fired separately?
Hi, Vinny. I'm glad you're here. So I have several glazes and several slips and several other, like, whenever I'm glazing, it's like tiny little buckets, many of them all over the table. So the blue glaze, I have an 04 blue glaze, a cone 6 blue glaze, and I mix the two of them and have like the middle of that temperature. Same with slips. A slip is not about the temperature, but it's about the thickness of the slip. So some of them is very watery, some is super thick, and depending, so that's how I achieve different surfaces in the work. That's how I like develop my language. So the very fluid, like the 04 glaze underneath, makes things blister. And if it's a thin slip over it, if it's a thick slip over it, it cracks and becomes like all these little cracks apart. And then if you put like a cone 6 blue glaze and a thin slip, it starts to peel. And if it's a thicker slip, it really peels. So yeah, it's hard to explain like through, you know, virtual conversation, but it's many different places and temperatures to achieve different surfaces.
Absolutely. All right, we'll end on a question from Zakria Rabani. Do you think you will return to the beach permanently? And do you think that if you do, it will affect your work? In what ways might it be affected?
You know, Zach, I would love to go back chasing summers. I am a summer person, and winter is not easy for me, especially like being so long as it is here. But as of now, it's not on my plans. Like, I plan to stay here for a while, but I don't know, in the future, if I had the choice and I could choose any place that I would like to live, probably being close to the water, it's a big deal to me. And of course it would affect my work. I cannot tell you because it's not happening yet, but water, it's so powerful. And I love swimming, and I miss the sensation of being underwater and being like touched by water, all the body, and having this pressure, you know. I can't imagine, but I'm sure it will change a lot, or
Yeah.
influence a lot.
Definitely seems like it adjusts with every move.
Yeah.
Response to the landscape. All right, thank you so much, Lou. I guess just as a sign off, like how can people reach you in the future if they have any other questions, and maybe where can they find more of your work?
So there's the website that I put it early on, but it's my name. My name is not easy, but it's louisederoualle.com. So, and if you want to be in touch with me, if you go to the ranch website, there's a staff page. You can find my email there, and you can email me anytime. I'll be happy to give you my phone, and we can have a conversation too. And it's also a good way to know my name, and you can type it. I'm sorry, I'm also on Instagram, but I'm not really good at posting my own work. I do post like a lot of this window views that are seeing and all my travels and inspirations around the world.
Great.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Ranch.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, we'll have Zakaria Rabbani, our sculpture coordinator, presenting next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. All right, everyone have a good night.
Thank you.